Welcome to Future Trends, where we examine the latest stories reshaping tomorrow's international dynamics. This week's headlines: US pledges peace deal help to assure Ukraine's security. Global plastic treaty talks collapse. German minister says China increasingly aggressive, and AI designs antibiotics for superbugs. Starting with politics, Bolivia's left in historic defeat. Bolivians decisively rejected the leftist party, which has ruled the country for most of the past 2 decades, in a first-round presidential election vote. It likely paves the way for more market-friendly policies for its crisis-affected economy. Centrist Senator Rodrigo Paz secured 32.18% of the vote, while Eduardo del Castillo of the Movement for Socialism had just 3.16%, according to initial results. Indian protests against electoral roll reform. India's opposition accused the Election Commission of rushing through a major electoral roll revision in eastern Bihar state, saying it could render vast numbers of citizens unable to vote. The revision of nearly 80 million voters involves strict documentation requirements from citizens, triggering concerns it could lead to the exclusion of vulnerable groups, especially those who are unable to produce the paperwork required to prove their citizenship. Peru signs military crimes amnesty bill into law. The legislation grants amnesty to military personnel, police, and civilian self-defense units for crimes committed during the 1980 to 2000 campaign against Shining Path guerrillas that killed 70,000 people. The law defies Inter-American Court of Human Rights warnings and could affect 156 decided cases and 600 ongoing prosecutions, following Peru's 2024 adoption of a statute of limitations that already benefited late President Fujimori and 600 military personnel. South Korea to restore suspended military pact with North Korea. The 2018 Comprehensive Military Agreement, which halted certain military activities along the border with North Korea, was suspended amid rising tensions, included measures such as ending drills near the demilitarized zone and dismantling guard posts. South Korea said it would also halt propaganda broadcasts and leaflet campaigns, framing the move as part of a broader effort to ease inter-Korean hostility, though North Korea's response remains uncertain. Myanmar junta sets December 28th poll despite civil war. Large parts of the country are administered by pro-democracy guerrillas and powerful ethnic armed organizations which, along with ousted opposition leaders, have pledged to block polls. Myanmar has been impacted by conflict since the military deposed the government of Democratic leader Aung San Suu Kyi in 2021, making unsubstantiated allegations of electoral fraud. Turning to conflict news, US would help assure Ukraine's security in peace deal. President Trump made the unspecified pledge during a summit at the White House, where he hosted President Zelensky and a group of European allies days after Trump met with Russian President Putin in Alaska. Zelensky welcomed the promise as a major step forward, adding that the guarantees would be formalized on paper within the next week to 10 days, and saying Ukraine offered to buy about $90 billion worth of US weapons. Nationwide protests in Israel over war in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli protesters called for a deal to free hostages in Gaza in one of the largest and fiercest protests in 22 months of war. It came as its military stepped up attacks on Gaza City, and reports that South Sudan and Israel are discussing a deal to resettle Palestinians from Gaza in the troubled African nation, the plan quickly dismissed as unacceptable by Palestinian leaders. Meanwhile, Israel said it struck an energy infrastructure site used by the Houthis in response to repeated attacks. German minister says China increasingly aggressive. China's repeated threats to unilaterally change borders in the Asia-Pacific region was also questioning principles of international law, Foreign Minister Waterfall said, adding that China's increasingly aggressive behavior in the Taiwan Strait and the East and South China Seas also has implications for Europe. US used about a quarter of high-end missile interceptors in Israel-Iran war. US forces countered Tehran's barrage of ballistic missiles by firing more than 100 high-end THAAD missile interceptors during Israel's 12-day war with Iran in June. The US has 7 THAAD systems and used 2 of them in Israel in the conflict. DRC's army battles convicted war criminals militia. The Convention for the Popular Revolution, CPR, is a militia founded by Thomas Lubanga, the Achiri warlord convicted by the International Criminal Court for recruiting child soldiers. Lubanga was released after serving a 14-year sentence and announced in March that he was forming the CPR to topple the regional government. 19 civilians were reported killed in the fighting, which adds to instability in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, where Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have also seized territory. Moving to economics, US extends China's 145% tariff deadline for another 90 days. For now, fresh US tariffs on Chinese goods this year stand at 30%, while Beijing's corresponding levy on US products is at 10%. Norway's sovereign wealth fund sells its shares in 11 Israeli companies. It did not identify the companies. It still has investments in 50 Israeli companies, but said it is terminating contracts with external managers in Israel and will move all investments in Israeli companies in-house. Singapore key exports slip as US shipments fall 42.7%. Singapore's non-oil domestic exports slipped 4.6% in July from a year earlier. Southeast Asia's second-largest economy is heavily reliant on international trade, with the US its biggest market, and is vulnerable to any global slowdown induced by the tariffs, even if Singapore only faces a baseline 10% levy from the US. The large fall was largely caused by a 93.5% decline in pharmaceutical shipments. Australia August consumer sentiment boosted by rate cuts. The third cut in interest rates this year bolstered the outlook for finances and the economy. A survey showed consumer sentiment climbed 5.7% in July to its highest reading since early 2022. Brazil regulator suspends soy moratorium, orders probe into exporters. Competition Authority CAID ordered traders in the world's largest soybean exporter to end a program called Soy Moratorium or face large fines. The 2-decade-old voluntary agreement seeks to protect the Amazon rainforest. Brazilian farmers have complained that the agreement blocks farmers who comply with environmental rules. In development news, global plastic treaty talks collapse amid oil state pushback. UN negotiations on a landmark plastics treaty broke down after nearly 3 years of talks, with countries still split over whether to curb plastic production or focus on recycling. About 100 nations, including the UK and the EU, had pushed for limits on production, supported by major consumer companies like Nestlé and Unilever. Oil-producing states, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, opposed such measures and said better waste management was the solution. Kenya taps development banks for airport expansion. The need for new sources to finance a $2 billion expansion of its main airport in Nairobi came after Kenya cancelled a deal with India's Adani Group after its founder was indicted in the US. Meanwhile, the African Development Bank will contribute $500 million towards the financing of a new airport in Ethiopia, expected to be Africa's largest when completed in 2029. Indonesia eyes sovereign AI fund to drive development. Authorities overseeing the development of artificial intelligence have proposed a sovereign AI fund to finance Indonesia's ambitions to become a regional hub for the fast-growing technology. EU push to protect digital rules holds up trade statement with US. The European Union is trying to prevent the US from targeting the bloc's digital rules as both sides work through the final details of a delayed statement to formalize a trade deal reached last month. Brazil consumer coffee prices fall. Coffee has been one of the main drivers of inflation in Brazil, the world's second largest coffee market. But consumer coffee prices there fell 1.01% in July, the first drop in 18 months. Finally, our social news: Ethiopian fossils reveal new species in human evolution. Researchers have unearthed tooth fossils in Ethiopia dating to about 2.65 million years ago of a previously unknown species in the human evolutionary lineage, one that lived at the same time and place as the earliest known member of the genus Homo, to which our own species belongs. Malaysia houses almost 150,000 Rohingya refugees. The foreign minister said that until the military junta in Myanmar agrees to conduct free and fair elections throughout the country to pick a democratically elected government, the Rohingya refugees cannot be sent back. AI designs antibiotics for superbugs. Artificial intelligence has invented 2 new potential antibiotics that could kill drug-resistant gonorrhea and MRSA. The drugs were designed atom by atom by the AI and killed the superbugs in lab and animal tests, while still needing years of refinement and trials before they could be prescribed. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology team say AI could start a second golden age in antibiotic discovery. Wildfire smoke is 14 times more deadly than thought. Wildfire pollutant PM2.5, previously linked with death and morbidity, may even be more harmful than particles from traffic emissions, a new study found. Short-term exposure was responsible for an average of 535 deaths from all causes, including 31 from respiratory diseases and 184 from cardiovascular causes. Uruguay's votes in favor of euthanasia. The bill allows mentally competent adults with terminal or incurable illnesses to request assisted dying. It now joins Cuba, Colombia, and Ecuador in a societal shift across predominantly Catholic Latin America. Uruguay previously legalized gay marriage, abortion, and cannabis use. That's your Future Trends update for this week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories reshaping our world.